Good morning, everybody. Let's start our webinar, Zero Company Through the Eyes of the Hacker.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I know you were supposed to hear from Group-IB guys today, but we cannot allow them to share that information. So we will change the agenda and talk about...
Hey. Oh, come on. Those guys are everywhere. Yeah, we got rid of them. So sorry guys for everything. So we got rid of those guys. No worry, we are all good guys here. We are ready to proceed to share the information that they tried to stop us from doing. So no worries. Yeah, we're here with guys from Group-IB, and because they already took some of our time, I think it's final time to go on. So team, I think the floor is yours. Show what they wanted to stop us from showing.
So hi everybody. Stick on my camera. My name's Tim Bobak. I look after AssetZero here at Group-IB. I should be sharing my screen, and we jump right in. So let's talk a little bit about AssetZero and kind of contextualize the problem that we're trying to solve and what we're doing. So one of the new areas that we've started working in is looking at the attack surface differently. And I'd like to get into like why we do it, right? Obviously, David and his team, saying attacks are happening more frequently. It's already useful to kind of contextualize this for you guys in order to kind of see why we've got into looking at the attack surface. And why have we gone to all this bother to build, a whole product, to talk to you about it, all of this stuff. We could be sitting here, drinking coffee and doing something entirely different. But let's talk about the real problems that we actually have. So the biggest issue that we're seeing, Group-IB does 60,000 hours of incident response a year. And I'm sure you guys see in your day-to-day activity that the problem of the perimeter is one that is pretty much everywhere, right? And we see the problem as being like a dilemma. And that's that as we grow as organizations and as COVID has taken over, more and more attack surface has been exposed. But the sort of methodology for protecting our perimeter, our assets, is still focused around, I'd say, fairly old school approaches. Now, those are good approaches. They have to exist, like patch management, vulnerability scanners, penetration testing. However, those only account for basically a step-by-step process-driven approach that doesn't actually look at your assets in the same way that an attacker does. And what do I mean by that? Well, attackers don't care about what you know about, what your known scope is. They care about what they can attack. So whether it's in a GRC list or whether it's something that people are tracking, ultimately organizations have to know about all of those assets. And where we're doing incident response on a daily basis, we're seeing that the incidents aren't happening against the known perimeter assets and the methods used to protect them. The attackers are basically taking the approach of saying, well, I'm going to go on the deep and the dark web. I'm going to look at your shadow IT. I'm going to look at that, new piece of infrastructure that the IT team spun up with marketing, but forgot to tell the security team. Or maybe, there's been a situation, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, where, a previous, admin had his own infrastructure, maybe he had some ports open, he was doing some work, and he forgot to close them. And we're seeing that this organizational standpoint, how organizations manage their perimeter, is fundamentally good, but there's these holes that continue to appear. And what we're trying to do is look beyond that. And we'll talk about how we do that in a minute, but we still need to dive back into the context around this. And that is like, why is all this happening? And how is it happening? So when we go out and we do incident response, I sat down in the lab maybe 2 months ago and with our head of incident response, and I said, let's, Valery, let's go back over the last, let's say, 200 incidents. It was an extremely boring meeting. But when we did that, we found that, like, everyone always talks about, a new Chinese APT, a new really cool financial attack, this espionage, this and that, new malware. And this is all of the stuff that makes the news. Or, SolarWinds supply chain attack, isn't that exciting? But the stuff where we're doing response, and it could be big incidents, it could even be APT groups, but the majority of incident response that we're doing, and it's over 55%, is because of this initial problem. And that's that organizations might have really, really good patch management. They might have, frequent scanning done across their infrastructure. They might have been running pen tests, like on a pretty much permanent basis, but they're only doing it against the assets that they know about. And that means that the forgotten assets are where the attacks are happening. We're dealing with, complex organizations, good security, good personnel, but we can't protect as an industry what we don't know about. And that's why we're still seeing the majority of all of the AR that we do being against external basic vulnerabilities and infrastructure. So what I would describe as the perimeter. And it's not because teams don't know what they're doing. It's just because, for whatever reason, whether it's because of the massive growth in IT that's happening, there's just too much going on in the organization. There may only be periodic reporting or external discovery that's done on a case-by-case basis. That means that this problem is not going away. And basically, our footprint, and we look beyond this, we go into the deep in the dark web with our intelligence team, we look at underground forums, we look at the chats, we look at the marketplaces, we understand how these incidents are happening. And it's because people can't see their perimeter. So how do we mitigate that? Well, we've obviously built a system for that called AssetZero, but it's still useful to look into an actual case and kind of jump beyond that. So we did an incident response case. I believe this one was in Egypt last year. I just take it because it's quite an elegant example of how an incident happened. It's got some MITRE mapping on it, but it describes it. But effectively, this is the normal situation where an admin basically forgot to close a port after giving remote access. They were doing some work on, as normal, external IT provider working on some of the mobile applications in the development environment of the bank. Okay, fine. But that RDP was left open. Then someone came along, they brute forced it using stolen credentials from just a leak, using just credentials that they had lying around. Brute forced, got access to the bank. And then it's all the normal steps that you guys will be familiar with, dropping Mimikatz, getting credentials, raising privileges, moving to then run internal IP scanners, identify other additional infrastructure, switching off the EDR. And they had like a lot of good security solutions. This is a regulated organization. They're, spending maybe a couple $1 million a year between their SIM, their SOC, all of their security controls. But because of that one human-based oversight, all of these attacks then were able to happen. And what we saw is if we map it onto MITRE, there's obviously all of these different steps where they could have caught this incident. But, if we ask ourselves where's the easiest place, it's obviously right at the beginning. It's here, right before the attacker even gets access. Maybe they should have been doing some discovery on a permanent basis across their infrastructure and gaining visibility into it. So what our philosophy is, having understood these incidents, looked at them, is to say, well, how can we reduce that risk? How can we plot out an external attack surface with technology? How can we discover it so that it can then be mitigated, patched, so that organizations can actually see from the outside what their actual assets are? In the same way that, as Dave and his team, quite nicely introduced at the beginning, how can we get from A to B? And I'll be talking, fairly technically, but I don't want to go into too much detail. I want to actually show you guys an actual demo, jump in the interface and show you how we do it. But what we've done is effectively built an asset discovery tool that then provides security validation across your attack surface. And what that means is that we go out and we collect enormous bodies of information. For the last 6 years, we've been basically scanning the internet, collecting volumes of data. I'll talk a little bit more about our architecture in a moment. But effectively, we built a solution that then performs analysis, scans, data collection, OSINT, automates that process. So you guys just enter a domain or an IP, and then we automatically plot out the entire company or organizational attack surface automatically. You guys can also then add in obviously your own data, but effectively we then validate, curate, and provide validation against that attack surface then in real time, 24/7. And this is then covering shadow IT, but also then making it into a process where you guys can actually manage this. And we do this through basically our discovery technology. And I'll talk a little bit about this because it's quite important that you guys kind of don't in a bunch of marketing slides, but actually I suppose kind of understand where we're coming from. And what we did about 6 years ago is, I hope you guys can still see my screen, is we actually started to develop our own capability for plotting APT C2 infrastructure in our threat intelligence. And why we did that was we were in a process where we were seeing, like, let's take an APT, let's take a Chinese one, so I'm in a different product now, just so that you guys are aware, but I'm, we're having a conversation, admitted a one-sided one. But if we take someone like APT41, right, Chinese APT, they actually create C2s with a special series of characters. And we realized this, 5-6 years ago, that, hold on, if we're seeing that a threat actor makes the same attacker infrastructure repeatedly, we can scan for that, we can identify that, build a view of it, and then identify other attacks. And so we were like, great, this is fantastic. All of our all of our customers are going to be able to use this, work off of it. They'll be able to identify APTs, so on and so forth. Build up additional indicators, use that for threat hunting. But actually, what we really saw, strangely enough, is that every single organization started saying, what's my attack surface? How's my infrastructure look? And this then added to the fact that we also, began to understand that organizations also wanted to, and bear with me, I'll just jump in here. They wanted to map that infrastructure and understand about themselves, not necessarily always about these attackers that we're talking about, but actually they wanted to understand, say, well, how do I look, from the outside in? And so with AssetZero, what we've done is we create a topographical map of the entire internet. And we do that by scanning and detecting data. We run like a full internet scan every about approximately 40 to 60 hours. Then on top, and we basically build a map of the entire IP4 range, also IPv6 on resolves, passive SSL, passive DNS, who is data, email information, registrar information, so on and so forth. But in addition to that, we use that to then plot out how the internet looks, so that when we enter a customer's domain, we are able to then build a view of their own particular infrastructure. And then we layer on additional data and additional data and additional data so that you can get the context of your external attack surface. And we do this inside of AssetZero. I could show you a lot of these slides, but what I'm actually going to do is jump into the actual interface and show you what's up. So this is kind of like, obviously, the Group-IB infrastructure that I scanned earlier, and there's loads of it. And obviously, we're doing a lot of malware analysis. This is not a great example. So I'm actually going to show you a cool example inside of AssetZero. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a random company. This one's like a so I don't think anyone really is going to mind. And what I've done is I've just entered their primary domain. That's all that there is here. But through that analysis, we've been able to then build up a view of this organization, their infrastructure, where that might look. So you can see that they've got quite a big global profile. They've got some Microsoft stuff here on the West Coast of America. They've got, some, hosting in Germany. But again, the majority of their infrastructure is actually in Eastern Europe. And what we've done is we've gone out and we've actually built a graph of how that infrastructure actually looks. Again, there's quite a lot. I need to turn off physics. That'll make things a little bit easier to jump into. But we've then built up this profile of actually all of their infrastructure and how that links in together. But rather than just giving that to an organization as like this standalone, here's your map, we then allow for categorization. And inside of our interface, we've actually built a really simple tool as a way that you can then manage and build and then mitigate the threats to your external perimeter that we're able to map. And we do that in two ways. obviously we provide like a dashboard that has all of this data, and it has the high level view of how this infrastructure is rating. We use this for baselining. Also, if customers want to compare themselves to other industries and other sectors, you can do that. But our goal here is to score the company and understand the risk that relates to them. This particular company has got fairly terrible security. So they've got a huge amount of perimeter vulnerabilities. They've got open ports, network security issues. And we then classify those issues as high or medium severity. And then from there, obviously build up tickets that can be resolved in order to then map that infrastructure. But to get to that stage, what we do is we actually then map out all of the infrastructure. So this is like an e-commerce firm. So they've actually got loads of, for example, development infrastructure that's internet facing. And what we do is we plot out a path of how we've identified this infrastructure as well, made it belong to an organization. So in this case, we've actually done it on the registrar telephone number that you can see on my screen here. So when they're registering this domain, they listed a telephone number. That telephone number was also linked to their development domains. And from there, we're able to actually identify some of the subdomains. In this particular, it seems to be their QA API staging, which is something that might be at risk. This might be something that an organization could have forgotten about. And so we then batch and can collect all of this data so that an organization can actually understand what is their potential actual real attack surface. Maybe these developers have created infrastructure and not told the IT security team. Or maybe, for example, I don't know, maybe there's some VPNs that are internet facing. Luckily they've got no VPN stuff. Maybe there's some admin stuff. Okay, yeah, so here we can see they've got various different subdomains that might be related to administration. There's also confirmed domains, we can see here. So, their admin gate and so on and so forth. But we're not just building up a view of the domains, it's also IPs, SSLs, the software that's actually located on that infrastructure. And obviously you can validate and then confirm the attack surface. So in this particular case, I've ignored a couple just while I was messing around with this earlier on today, but also then confirmed a few. But this basically builds then the capacity for an organization to map their attack surface, to say these are my assets out of the ones that have been discovered by Group-IB, and then we then validate those assets. And we do that via those 8 content categories that are here on the dashboard. We create security checks against all of them. And we don't just do it on the domains, we do it on SSLs, we do it on IPs and subnets that an organization might have. So in this case, they're all in the new category because I haven't analyzed them in any detail. But we can already see that many of these have got open ports. And we can also dive deeper into the software that's actually on this infrastructure and also see that many of them, for example, have a specific software type and that software type actually has vulnerabilities on it. So we can begin to see that, there's a lot of risk actually on this infrastructure, but how do we manage that? So the first way that we do it, because obviously organizations are pretty big infrastructure, obviously you guys can quickly load in all of your known infrastructure that might be on your asset list. So I'm on a huge Group-IB instance, so I've got to load in a whole bunch, so bear with the system. But you guys can actually add these in yourselves. You can quickly take all your assets and validate them, and then immediately see, for example, the gap between your known assets and what Group-IB is detected. We use a discovery filter inside of the main tab, but inside of our platform, you can then actually just quickly add a bunch of infrastructure, add domains. You can also add things that you might want to check. So you might want to add, I don't know, like an entirely new domain, like group-ib.com, for example. I'm not going to add it, but you could add anything you want, or you can exclude domains as well. And this then actually gives you a view of what's actually going on the infrastructure, whether it's yours, whether it belongs to you. And then that additional step of security checks and validation, we then conduct inside of our issues tab. And here we then do hundreds of security checks, and those could be relating into 8 of our different content categories. So each of those categories, there should be about 6 or 7 here, or maybe they've got, no, everything's bad, these guys have got all 8. But that then relates into whether this infrastructure, could be an IP, it could be a domain, has actually been mentioned on the deep in the dark web, whether that particular infrastructure has leaked credentials that are in botnets or in leaked data sites or on Pastebin or other sources, We also provide checks to see, for example, if there are any vulnerabilities on that infrastructure. And a quick point about how we're doing this. So I mentioned that we're scanning, the entire internet and doing discovery. Our goal isn't to be a vulnerability scanner. This is an important point, so I'll repeat it, and also so I don't lose my place. But we're not trying to be like a Tenable or a Qualys. Those tools are great. I recommend them. They're part of an information security toolkit. What we're doing is trying to do something fundamentally different, and that's give you guys visibility sort of beyond the scanner, beyond the stuff that you would normally get from those tools. And we do that through passively scanning that infrastructure. We're not trying to exploit any of these vulnerabilities. We're identifying them based on header responses, so like what software version is actually on the infrastructure, so that can then be used in the remediation process. We're not going out and fuzzing this, getting our IPs blocked, or causing any kind of security alerts for you, the customer, and complicating your situation in your SOC. If you guys want to, you can probably actually see scans on your infrastructure. We do a lot of scans by looking at our PTR. And we also have like a deep description in our help center of exactly how we're scanning, and also what dynamic infrastructure we're using if you guys really want to dig in and find out about exactly, how we're rescanning, how we're functioning, and so on and so forth. But our goal is not to do aggressive scanning. We're discovering, we're giving visibility about this scope, so that then an organization can then take a view of their external perimeter and understand, well, actually, what are these risks that I'm facing? What are these issues? And either in the workflow that's available here, or through a value-added reseller or a partner, such as David's team at Real Security, you guys can then either outsource this to a services team or manage these requests yourselves and identify, for example, if there are any high-risk vulnerabilities or any infrastructure that might be of particular issue. So, for example, here we can see, we talked about this QA staging domain a little bit earlier for the development, the dev environment, but they've actually got a relatively high Lodash CVE that is on the development environment, and it's probably something that they definitely, it might not have the highest base score or impact score, but certainly something that shouldn't be on a development environment. And we do this across a huge amount of CVEs. Again, we're not exploiting them. We're just letting the organization know, look, you've got this particular infrastructure risk. You need to be working towards removing that. And in order to not overload our customers with noise, we also remove any tickets that are resolved automatically. So as you can see, the organization here, they're not like terrible. They are still doing some patch management, but they clearly haven't got a view. You can see that this is happening on, all of the patching is happening on their main domains, but it's not happening on this forgotten infrastructure. These QA, these staging pages, the, like infrastructure that most organizations might not necessarily have a view over. And so we're then catching this and giving them that visibility of the extension of their information, their perimeter, and so on and so forth. And again, this goes back to the first points that I was discussing, which is organizations don't have these incidents on infrastructure that they know about. It's not, these incidents don't happen on, like the main domain, in this case, it would be 21 VK. It's going to be happening in these forgotten infrastructure pieces, or perhaps it's going to be happening in an area where the organization has zero visibility, like, for example, on, let's say, third-party accounts that are being compromised by threat actors on the deep and the dark web. Or perhaps it might be that they are in, see if we've got any tags here. No, they don't have any malware security alerts, but it could be that various different botnets are actually connecting to their infrastructure. Maybe in botnet logs, they've got some IPs and domains. So I'm going to probably change, this is why, change some of the, I'll just put it onto a general filter. Should be able to then show some dark web data as well, where this particular organization has been mentioned. There we go. Here's a quick example. So we've actually identified that on the OG users underground site, they're actually mentioning a specific piece of infrastructure. In this case, it's just begging for money. So it's not a huge, this is why it's a medium severity alert, but it's just to let them know that, we see that you're being mentioned 37 days ago on this particular underground forum that is, consistently used for cybercrime. Or it could be, maybe we've got some malware security data here, but it could be a botnet log. As we see, this one's been remediated, but they actually had a JS sniffer. So JavaScript sniffers are tools that are used in order to steal usernames and passwords. And it was this JavaScript sniffer was actually up on their infrastructure for 5 days. And potentially that was then stealing user credit card data and payment data. So again, that would be quite a large risk that they had a JavaScript sniffer. So similar to the British Airways breach, happened I think in 2018 or 2019. I have to do some malware history in order to, or incident history analysis. We can maybe Google it. But effectively, they were having malware hosted actually on their website. We identified that using signatures and performing analysis on unknown infrastructure and unknown tracking of this particular malware type. So this is how we're then gaining visibility and allowing customers to then see not just, okay, well, we have some vulnerabilities, let's run a scanner on what we know about, but actually let's look at this holistically. Let's look at all of this forgotten pieces of infrastructure, these weird supply chain attacks, the fact that people are managing to get script onto our site and detect that. And then that can then be remediated. And that's really our goal with AssetZero, is to increase that visibility. I mean, we can show you lots of bells and whistles and graphs and so on and so forth of how that infrastructure looks. But ultimately, what you guys are able to get out the back of this is meaningful alerts that tie into real pieces of cyber criminal data, underground infrastructure, malware security, or just the vulnerabilities that are actually present on an organization's attack surface at any one moment in time. And then obviously out the back of that, what we provide as well is the security scorings over time, so that an organization can actually track their progress and also provide internal deliverables for management. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we're also introducing a new functionality as well for cross-referencing. As you guys might have noticed, we've got, it'll take a minute to load because there's so many companies in my particular admin account. If we choose a smaller instance, it's not going to show us amount, well, unless someone adds a huge amount of companies, but I've got about 2,000, so a minute or two to load. But you can actually then compare yourself to different organizations in your sector. And this is what we'll be introducing in the next 2-month period, is so that while you can actually tag your industry segment, whether it's administrative services, metals and mining, cyber banking, so on and so forth, you can then also do an anonymized comparison against companies in your region, so that you can understand and contextualize where you were at versus other organizations of similar size, of similar industry, of similar regional existence, so that you can then baseline that and show your progress over time. So it goes beyond just the security outcome. It's also providing a useful insight into the rating of how that company is progressing in terms of their security posture over time.
People, I will contact you for a quote. This looks really interesting.
But yeah, basically, guys, as well, actually, how are we benefiting you guys? Well, our goal is actually really with AssetZero is to do some quite basic things. But if we look back to that initial incident that I showed you, the Lockbit ransomware case, we see a lot of these security weaknesses and also then ultimately incidents as being quite avoidable. We want to give you guys visibility, and it's relevant to organizations. Obviously, you saw in my instance, I've got a couple thousand different companies. We tend to see something interesting on any company, and it's very easy for us to deploy. I can't be sitting and running integrations for 2,000 companies. I just don't have the time or the energy, I'll be frank. But we actually work entirely agentlessly. So in fact, in order to create a company, probably worth showing, in fact, all you guys need to do is we set you up with your own, and it could be a partner who creates it for you, it's like David's team, or for example, you guys can actually create a company yourself. So I could be like real security, and then I could enter, you know, domain, and then actually assign myself an industry segment. So I could be like mining company, and I might even get a couple of options. Maybe I'll get data mining, Bitcoin mining, or actual mining like in a hole. Choose whatever I want to look at and what sector I'm relevant to, and then actually then build up a view, immediately get a report generated. It creates itself in about 30 minutes, and then we go into then a system of permanent enrichment, permanent scanning and collection, and then we're identifying any new assets over time that are being created. So basically, this then allows you to then get basically your progress immediately started. You can kick off in a couple of minutes, and it really is relevant for big organizations or small organizations because we all have different problems. But ultimately, big organizations, small organizations, everybody's still having these perimeter-based vulnerability or penetration or attack issues. So this is our approach to then basically dealing with those issues and allowing customers to become better protected and to have better visibility of their infrastructure. We do that, again, by providing context across these 8 different content categories. Again, I'd like to stress we're not a scanner, but we are providing good visibility into the vulnerabilities on the perimeter. We're giving good views of open ports, services, applications, leak credentials, the malware stuff, the dark web stuff, but also, you know, basics like is DMARC in place, SPF, you know, DNS and domains, is DNSSEC enabled, and also, you know, our SSL certificates expiring. It's giving you guys a health check and notifications about as well some of the really basic stuff that might not directly cause an incident, but can cause security issues and customer issues as well down the line. So our workflow is then to continuously operate, validate automatically, create you guys the notifications to then enable engagement and remediation. And then once those are then solved, we also then automatically resolve the tickets. So we're giving this workflow as well native in AssetZero in order to give immediate visibility and results to allow you guys to prevent basically any of these incidents, but effectively to work then frictionlessly in protecting your infrastructure. Also, a quick point, we've built, it's actually a really important point, because even this is quite a new category of product. At Group-IB, we've seen how this is relevant to organizations of all sizes. Very frequently, you know, I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. It's not our first day in security. A lot of the time, new technology is very expensive. Our position with Group-IB has been that we see this is relevant to absolutely everyone. So we've kept the pricing very affordable, and it sort of ranges from the license cost per year without any services between sort of 5,000 euro up to about 30,000 euro if you're a massive organization, but generally somewhere in the lower end of that spectrum. So, and the reason for that is that we see these incidents and we know it's pretty much relevant for everybody. You know, I've got my instance of 2,000 customers, and I see, you know, big organizations, small organizations, they have issues. So our goal is then to allow you guys to test drive it. And perhaps, Michael, you'd like to say a few words actually to that point about getting some test reports, getting some quick results. We can obviously provide some insights to the customers who are with us today. And so Michael, I'll hand over to you, and you can maybe talk through about how customers can get their free report, and also some of the other interesting stuff that we've got in store with our upcoming cybercrime conference that's fully online with Group-IB. So Michael, over to you. And also, in the meantime, if there are any questions, please write them in the chat, and I'll be very happy to.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And thank you, everybody, for the participation in our seminar. So as Tim said, our platform AssetZero is very light, elegant solution for those who would like to see its own company from the external perspective, as if it could be seen by hackers before the attack. Very important thing just to underline this, that this solution doesn't require any agents, doesn't require any intervention inside the infrastructure of the customer. Just enough to run AssetZero is to put the main domain and the system will collect all data related to this main domain, all subdomains, all related IP addresses, and then create the whole picture from of the external surface of the company. So it doesn't require anything else but just domain. So it is easy to launch and easy to monitor and easy to use, as it was presented by Tim. Of course, it makes a snapshot of the current situation at the moment, but the system is organized in the manner that it provides with the constant monitoring. So you can see on daily or hourly basis any changes within your organization, because as we all know, that time matters. So the most important thing is to see and then to take the action, to react. Because what we used to observe very often, that even with the fully blown IT cybersecurity infrastructure, customers can miss the point where, for example, new vulnerability was somehow discovered. And then it takes sometimes days, weeks, without this vulnerability notified inside the organization. And then it may happen that it will be nice gap to jump in for hackers.
So thanks very much, guys. Appreciate your time. And we'll remain online for a couple more seconds just in case there are any further Q&A. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.